All right. Good morning, everyone. Um, let's go ahead and get started. I want to let everyone know that this webinar is recorded, and so we'll be sharing the recording with you afterwards. The second thing is that in the chat section here in the Teams webinar, you can send me messages. And so if you have any questions whatsoever during the webinar, I'd be happy to address them. So please send them there, and then at the appropriate time, I'll answer them. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Hai. I'm co-founder of Affluence, the company behind Prioritization. Hopefully you're here today because you're new to Prioritization and you're looking for a way to learn about the software in order to become more effective. The goals of the webinar are 1, to help you understand the basics of Prioritization. 2, provide you a framework for you to get the most out of the software with the least amount of work. Don't we all want that? And then thirdly, help you envision what your work and life success may look like with Prioritization. One of the things I like to start with is talk about the challenges that I've seen very often with our customers. First, I've noticed that a lot of people mention that team members have trouble understanding what's priority right now. And it's so interesting because it's not just about the individuals, but across the whole organization or the whole department or the whole group, where people are not aligned on what it is that they need to work on. Secondly, on a more personal level, individuals are struggling to keep track on the status of work across so many areas of responsibilities. One of the things that's really happening is that no one really owns just one aspect of a product or work or a project anymore. You're constantly juggling between many, many different things at the same time. And so on a day-to-day basis, what you're really looking at is what are the status of all the things that I need to work on, what it is that I need to focus on today, and then it's constantly shifting, constantly changing. And then thirdly, emails and meeting cause far too much context switching. And this is really interesting because over the last few years, we've invested so much in so many different software applications. As many of you are on Microsoft Teams today, you know that you're using Microsoft Teams more, you're using emails more, you might be using Slack or all these other chat software. And yet at the same time, our life has not been any easier. And in fact, if anything, we're actually just getting bombarded with priorities and questions and all that in real time at any point in time during the day. And I think more so than anything, everyone is struggling with that. And the context switching is just a time sink that really pulls you away from the work you need to do. So what is Prioritization? Prioritization is a comprehensive email, priority, and project management software to help teams manage emails, conduct efficient meetings, and get real-time status updates on critical projects and priorities. Even though I mentioned teams, helping team manage projects, what really I'm talking about is actually it starts with the individual, it starts with you. So Prioritization started more than a decade ago as a software to help individuals understand and track their priorities so they can determine what it is they need to work on. Over time, the software evolved into not only helping you understand what you need to work on, but also helping you communicate your priorities to the rest of the team, the rest of the organization. Nevertheless, at the core of Prioritization is the individual, you, and helping you understand what it is that you should do at any point in time. So how does Prioritization help with these challenges that I mentioned? First, we use what's called the 4-quadrant methodology, which I'll go into more detail soon, to promote effective prioritization. Don't ever forget that Prioritization is a prioritization software. If you use Prioritization for any other purposes and you're struggling with it, go back to the basics. Use Prioritization as a way to track your work and where it fits within the bigger context. Secondly, Prioritization provide different views, such as the one-on-one, the agenda, and the timeline, to help you understand what you need to work on within the right context. And when I say context here, I mean what it is that you care about at this moment in time. Is it the date, right? Do you have to determine what is it that I need to work on today? Or is it people? What is it that I need to do for my manager or for my colleague? Or is it priority? What is it that I need to work on within this particular project? And so each of those have its own context. So Matrix provides you different views to help you understand each of those contexts and determine what it is that you need to work on, regardless of what context it is. And then thirdly, Matrix actually provide really deep integrations into software systems you already use. In particular, we're probably the most integrated solution in the Microsoft Teams and Outlook ecosystem. So we can bring together email, task, project, and meeting management into one central place. Again, with the whole simple purpose of helping you understand your priorities at any point in time. So what makes Matrix better? First, it's the only project email and meeting management software that is Microsoft 365 Security certified and is Microsoft Outlook's editor's choice. And it's the only one that's certified across that Teams app, Outlook app, and web app. We're leveraging AI more and more to help you achieve your goals. It's one of the areas that I'm really excited about, just because I think we can actually use AI in a very specific manner to help you in particular identify what you need to do in order to achieve your goals. And then we provide what's called people-centric collaboration. And what I mean by that is, forget projects, right? Because at the end of the day, when you work on a project, you're technically working on it for somebody. It could be your client, it could be your manager, it could be your colleague, yourself, your family. So people-centric collaboration flips all of that and helps you identify what are the things you need to do for this person, regardless of the project it's in. And then finally, Matrix is available as a standard software solution, as well as a HIPAA compliant solution for healthcare life sciences, or if you have to manage PII, and then Azure Government Cloud for state and local government. So if you're interested in our enterprise solutions or any of our other managed solutions, just reach out to us. It's pretty straightforward, but the solution works across all of our platforms, as I mentioned. And then what makes Matrix effective? One reason I want to highlight this is because what Matrix does best, it helps you determine what I need to, when I said what it does best for me, is it helps me understand what I need to work on now, what I need to work on later, what I should delegate. And then priorities are constantly shifting. One of the things that's so fascinating is that if you go and you look at the workforce, everyone is talking about how to be more agile, more efficient, more effective at changing and adapting. Yet at the same time, everyone's working on this very fixed schedule or determination of priorities and never talk about what it is that you need to work on. Matrix is a software that bridges that, and it's intended to be the one place where everyone can go to know exactly what needs to be done. So let's talk about the basics behind Matrix. So there's a famous quote attributed to former President Eisenhower: "What is important is seldom urgent, and what is urgent is seldom important." And what I really like about this quote is it breaks everything we have to do into two dimensions, the dimensions of importance and urgency. And secondly, it tells you that pretty much those two dimensions aren't necessarily related. So what happens is there are tasks that are important and urgent, and yet there are tasks that are not important and not urgent. And so when you are deciding what to work on, how do you put it within this bigger framework? So one of the things I like to do is I like to ask, customers or webinar participants like you to perform this very simple exercise. Imagine take out a piece of paper and start writing down everything you have to do, right? You can decide on the scope, just keep them on a sort of similar level, right? Are they goals for the quarter, or are they tasks you have to do today, or things you want to do this month for any particular project? And so now imagine for a second they have this very long list. It could be 5 items, it could be 20 items. My next question is, what do you work on next? How do you decide what to work on? Do you start at the top of the list or the bottom of the list? And that's the challenge that we often face, which is we like to put things in a list because it's so easy to add. But what's not so easy about it is deciding which one of those tasks help you start your day. So instead of putting into a list, what you do is you put it into a 2x2 matrix. So imagine take it that 20 items. What are the things that are actually important and urgent? And those are the things that goes into the do now quadrant. And then the things that are important but not urgent, those are the things you should plan for. And the things that are not important but urgent, you put them in the delegate box. And then finally, everything else you should just get rid of. So the inbox is just the place, the repository where you have new ideas and you haven't decided where they should go into. And what's really interesting about this exercise is that the moment you do something like this, then when you look at the plan, you look at the matrix, you know exactly where you should be focusing your time. If you have things in the do now quadrants, those are fires. You need to fight that, right? So those are the things you actually should be working on all day, every day, as opposed to anything else. But instead, what we find often is that we're always constantly pulled into the delegate box. And when I think about the delegate box, those are, again, the not important but urgent stuff. That's emails, right? I get hundreds of emails per day. And guess what? Every time I open my emails, I have to go and respond to somebody. Is it important? Not always, but I end up doing it. And so that happens to the best of us. It doesn't matter how much we practice in terms of prioritization, we have to be in control of how we spend our time. So then again, with Matrix, the whole idea is to add this structure to the things that you have to do so you know where you need to focus your time. Now, I'm going to admit this exercise is extremely hard. It is not easy, and this is where a lot of users, you included, might face significant challenges because you can't go and decide how things all fit within this framework. But that's the point. That is the point of using Matrix because it puts you in the structure, and now it's very easy for you to see where you should be spending your effort. Now, the magic happens in this next step. Take that piece of paper that you've put it into the quadrants and walk around the office and start comparing notes. Imagine if your manager did the same exercise. Imagine if your colleagues that you work with all the time did this exercise, or your clients did this exercise, and they wrote down their priorities. And then they say, these are the things that are important to me. And then everyone else did the exact same thing. And you start comparing notes and you start to look for discrepancy. What's really interesting is that the 4-quadrant Eisenhower matrix, as you use it with Matrix, creates alignment because it forces you to prioritize from the beginning. And then the second part that's not so obvious is that success from using Matrix isn't about finding what everyone agrees on. It's about discovering the disagreement on when things should be a priority and when they shouldn't be a priority. And that's the most non-obvious but most important takeaway that I want you to have today from this webinar about the fundamentals of Matrix. So Matrix is all around discovering that disagreement. When you think about project management software, you're thinking about the plan, you're thinking about the actions, you're thinking about these are the things we have to get done. The question is, should they even be done, right? That's the question. And so the follow-up, the corollary to that is, what about the key stakeholders? Do they agree that these things need to be done? Or what are the things that shouldn't be done? So I want you to take away from this is that when you use Matrix, think of it as a communication software. What it's doing is it's helping take the priorities from inside your brain, put it into a very visual cue, and then from there, compare notes with others to ensure that everyone's on the same page. And that's all there is to it. That's what our software does in a nutshell. As I mentioned, the webinars are recorded, and so we'll be posting this afterwards. So I recommend that you can check out some of the previous webinars as well. And then feel free to reach out to us at any point in time if you have questions. And again, if you have questions during this webinar, send it in the chat and I'll take a look at it. And so let's go ahead and get into the product presentation itself. So here I have Matrix open. One of the things that I want you to see right away is that when I have Matrix open, this is on the web app. On the left-hand side, my list of projects, and in the middle is the 4 quadrants. That's front and center. So every time you use Matrix, there's this 4 quadrant that's in your face, and whether you want it or not. And what's interesting is when you create a task, you have to decide what quadrant it goes in, right? So let's go ahead and create a task here. I'm going to have, this is in a project called My Personal Priorities. So I'm going to go ahead and say a follow-up with webinar participants. Okay, so I'm going to have a task I create for myself. But instead of actually just creating that task, I'm actually going to say due tomorrow, 2 p.m. Okay, and that's how it works, how I create a task in Matrix. And as you can see, after I create the task, on the right-hand side, the item details opens. And so if you think about the quadrants as a place for you to organize the priorities, the item details is a place for you to add additional metadata to the task itself. So for example, I have the task. I might want to star it. Starring it allow me to go and signify that this task is important. I can add an icon to it, right? So go ahead and I'll add a green icon here. And I really like the green, red, and yellow icon as a way to visualize the status of task. And so maybe green means it's on task, and then yellow means it's at risk, etc. So I've seen customers do that. But I like the icons. If you're a visual person, the icon's really helpful for you to see what are all the tasks are related, because you can go and sort by the icons and so forth later. And then as you scroll down, you see the ownership. So task starts out with you being the owner. And the idea behind Matrix is there's always an owner and there's always one owner. So you can't go and say that this particular task belongs to 3 different people, right? Because at the end of the day, if that's the case, then who's going to get it done? And then who to blame if it doesn't get done? So the idea is you're only one owner, and that's the person, the avatar that shows up here, and then they're next to every single task as well. However, you can have followers. And so the idea of followers, there are people that might be relevant to the task or those that want to follow the task. So here in my personal priorities project, maybe that's not so important that I have other followers. It's just for me to track my task. So here I'm the only person who would see this. Then I have progress, it's 0 to 100%, very straightforward. 100% means it's done. Effort, how much time does it take to get this task done? Not all efforts are required. Actually, in fact, most of the time I don't use effort, but sometimes when you are trying to delegate tasks to various groups of people and you want to make sure you understand how much time they need to allocate in order to get things done, then you may use the effort level. And then next to that, you have due dates. As you see, as earlier I typed due tomorrow at 2 p.m. So our system automatically interprets that for me, set the due date tomorrow at 2 p.m. my local time. And then there's reminders. And I do want to quickly mention the difference between dates and reminders. Let me give you an example. Let's say you have something that's really important that you need to work on and it's due in 2 weeks, right? But it's going to take you a few days to get started. If you only set a due date, you're going to forget, or rather the due date comes and you're not going to have enough time to get things done. So the idea of reminders is it allows you to actually set up a reminder to remind yourself to get started prior to that. And that's different from start date as well. So start date means when a task starts and when a task ends, but reminders is a way for me to be reminded that, hey, this is something that needs to be top of mind so I can work on it. So I personally always use due dates and I always use reminders. In fact, let me show you how I usually do it. So for instance here, I can go again, say I have that task, but I'm going to say due in 1 week to follow the webinar participants. So as you can see, as I type this in the chat here, due in 1 week, the text turned green, which means our system interprets it. It changed the due date for me, due in 1 week now. And then I'm going to set a reminder. It says remind me daily. So what's going to happen now is this task will be popping up in my reminders in my home view every single day to ensure that I get it done. I use this all the time when I need to follow up with customers much further down the road, right? It's very easy to remember tasks that's due tomorrow or due this week. It's very difficult to remember tasks that it's due in 3 months or 6 months. So when that's the case, you go ahead and set a due date in 6 months, and then you said remind me in 5 months or remind me monthly. And so Matrix will surface that up to you. And let me make another note on when and why you should use reminders. When we talk about importance and urgency, right, when the task you have to get done, if you see a task one time and you don't actually work on it, and then there's no system to actually remind you to work on that, that's going to get dropped. So the whole point of reminders is for you to use reminders whenever you feel like something is critical enough that that should be brought up to your attention constantly. And the way the human brain works is the constant reminder is what's actually really effective for us to actually ensure that we get those things done, right? That's why those urgency aspect of things always come back to bite us, even when they're not important, because they're just happen to be urgent. That ping, that notifications from all these apps. So think of the reminders as your cheat to get to that same state. Now, of course, when you set reminders, and if you click on the UI here, you'll see a lot of other options. You can remind yourself. You can remind everybody who follow this task. And so if you have multiple people, multiple stakeholders, and it's something that's very important, you might want to go and set reminders to everybody on a recurring basis. Again, If we talk about the 20% of tasks, I'm sorry, 20% of features in Matrix that gives you 80% of the value, I would say the due dates, the reminders, putting things in the appropriate quadrants, and assign it to the appropriate people. If you only did that today, or even the next 3 months, 6 months of using Matrix, you will get the most value of Matrix with almost minimal work. So put that down as a takeaway from today's webinar in terms of how you can best leverage Matrix. All these other features that I show you are there to help you get from that 80% to that 95, 98% in terms of value, but it is optional because if you don't do this 20% of the features for 80% of the value, you're going to start, dropping off other tasks anyways. So keep that in mind. So we'll continue in terms of other capabilities inside Matrix. If you scroll down a little bit more, you'll see the chat section. So as you can see, I've typed in messages here in the chat section. You can look at the chat section as a place to have a conversation with other people within the context of this task. It's like sort of like an email thread, right? Or it's like a conversation you have inside Teams where you're talking about things, but within context. So if you have one single chat room that talks about everything, good luck being on top of, good luck going back and finding what is that you discuss and so forth. So the whole point of the chat here in Matrix is that you have contextual conversation only related to this task. It is very, very helpful if you have 3 or 4 or 5 people talking about the same thing and you have one central place for that communication. And here's why. Let's say in 6 months, you've made a bunch of decisions and then you need to follow up on the task. And then you need to go back and review what is it that you said or what is it that has been done or the due dates that have been set. The Matrix chat here gives you that full record. It's an audit trail that gives you a history of every changes that you've made for that particular task. You can't do that in Teams. You can't do that in Outlook email and so forth. So use the chat to your advantage. Always send messages in here instead of just having Teams conversation and instead of just sending emails back and forth. Next, you have the notes section. Now, Matrix is not intended to replace your Google Docs or your Microsoft Office. That's what those software are for. So, don't go in here looking to add rich text and so forth. The notes section is just for you to add a little bit of details about the task, but you can also create subtasks as well. So you click on this and you can create subtask 1, subtask 2, and so forth. And then as you mark the subtask as done, the progress will get updated. And then next to that, you have the resources. So resources is a place for you to attach all these documents together. So let me give you an example. Let's say I have to respond to an email, right? Or rather, I have an email that I want to delegate to somebody else to answer. Instead of forwarding to them, what I'm doing is I'm actually creating a task attached to email to it, assign it to the pro people, and now they can go in, open that email, and respond to it. But there's a reason why it's resources, because it's not just the email, but maybe there's presentation or documents or links, et cetera, that you can attach. So the way it works in Matrix is you can attach documents, you can attach emails, you can attach web links, and let's say you have SharePoint or Drive or something like that, you're going to attach those to here as well. And then the other neat thing is that everything in Matrix has a link. So every action item in Matrix has a link as well. So what that allows you to do is you can actually link Matrix to other items. So for example, let's just say if I have a task and it's dependent on another task, well, I can go ahead and choose link to another Matrix item by going click on that link. And then I can say that this task is blocked by this task, right? Well, clearly these two tasks aren't actually blocked by because they're unrelated, but for the purpose of the demo, you see how I actually create this link, this dependencies between these different tasks in Matrix. And so Matrix allows you to build all these dependencies very, very easily directly from here. So that's on the item detail side. So now let's go back and look at the big picture. So when you create a task in Matrix, again, you've decided what quadrant it goes in, you added all those details. But now if you want to move things around, how do you do that? Well, it's very simple. Let's just say this task I should consider to be extremely important. So I'm just going to drag it over to the do now quadrants. And so now it's very visual for me to look at this and see, okay, this is something I need to work on. And whereas these other tasks are actually sort of lower within the totem pole. One thing and one feature I really like about Protomatrix that may not be obvious to new users is the ability to resize these quadrants. So as you use Protomatrix more, you might have a lot of tasks in one quadrant and so forth. And so what you want to do is you actually want to go ahead and resize this so then you can actually focus all your attention on the quadrant one. And it's funny because this is so critical as part of per matrix, this functionality rather, because the ability to go and visually reorganize that I sometimes forget to talk about it in webinars because it's so obvious to me that's what you should use it for. So I wanted to make sure that I talk about that explicitly today. So you can go ahead and resize that. And so, one of the things I really like is just having 75% of the screen dedicated to quadrant one, right? So then that when you open this, you look at that task always. And so you can see again, adding tasks is very, very simple, very straightforward. Now we talk about the matrix view, but in reality, Party Matrix is just a way to store information all around all these tasks. And so we can take the same data and actually show it in different ways. So for example, I can go to the list view. What is the list view? Well, it takes all those tasks that you have, put in a list. I can still see what quadrant they belong in. I can see icons. I can see the owner. I can see the name of the task, and then the modified and due date. And I can sort by each of these as well. I like this view for identifying the tasks that are overdue because you can sort by due date and just see all the tasks that are red. And so those are the ones that are overdue that you need to work on. And if you need to actually filter all these tasks to actually find all the things that maybe you are responsible for or a colleague is responsible for, you can click on the filter option here, and our filtering option is extremely powerful. It can go and actually create all sorts of filters across your action items. Now, it's obvious that I have only 3 items here. I can just look at it and know exactly what I need to do. But in my real project, I have something like 300 projects. Different Party Matrix projects. And so I have something like maybe 30 or 40,000 tasks. So when I have that many, I can't just go and scan a list. So the filtering is very useful for that purpose because I can go and identify the task assigned to me or the task assigned to person A or B or C or something like that. And then not only that, I can go click on filter by state and say, what are all the items that someone has finished, but in a certain quarter, in a certain between a certain times period for certain quadrants. And so those are all the kind of reports that you can run in Per Matrix as in the filter section right here. So now I have the list view. I have the calendar view. So obviously any task that has a due date is on the calendar view. And what's neat about this is I can actually just drag and drop if I want to change a due date very easily. And then I have the timeline view. So the timeline view is the Gantt chart, right? So if you had dependencies like what I created earlier, then suddenly you can see how we have dependencies here. You can say that this task is related to this task. The idea here is we make it simple for project managers or people who want to see how all these things tie together across longer period. So for example, when you look at the calendar, it's really good for seeing months. But then if you look at the Gantt chart, it's really good for seeing across multiple months, 6 months or a year or something like that. And then beyond that, you have the feed view, which is the history of changes as well as the reports. So those are the different basic views inside one particular project. So let me show you how to create a project, because again, that's a core part of Pretty Matrix, right? So here on the left-hand side, I have my project here, but what I can do is I can actually click on the project here and then choose Create Project. So when I create a project, I have several options. The first is a blank project. If I click on blank project, I can literally just type in the project name. I can add some notes if needed. And then user group is essentially, groups of people that work together. You can think of it as departments. And if you don't create user group, that's totally fine too. You can manually control who's in any single project. And then you can choose the basic Party Matrix template, which is the Eisenhower Matrix, and then a color. So the idea of the color scheme is actually very, very simple. Imagine if you have different departments or you have different types of projects, maybe external projects, internal projects, or other categorization. So I like the colors just as a way to color code the different projects. So it's very visual. If you haven't gotten the hint already, Part Matrix is a lot about visualization and helping you see easily what it is that you need to work on. So that's how you create an empty, a basic blank project. But what I can also do is actually I can choose from other options as well. So I can choose from what's called public templates. And these are essentially other formats of the 4 quadrants that we've created that you can use. And so essentially it's just some best practices that we've seen in the past. What you can also do is you can actually create your own templates as well in Matrix. And if you do so, you can actually choose from one of your existing templates instead. Let me give an example. Let's just say if you create a matrix in Matrix that's called employee onboarding, right? These are the 30 things a new employee at your organization will have to work on. Well, go ahead and create that matrix, create all the priorities and so forth. Then you can save it as a template. Now, when you have a new employee, instead of creating everything from scratch, you can actually just launch a whole new template, choose the start date, and everything else is created for you. Extremely good time saver. And I'll show you how to create that template. And I see some questions that's coming in around modifying the templates and creating templates. I'd be happy to answer, and I'll show you at the end of the presentation on how to leverage each of those things to become more effective. So these are good questions that are coming in. I'm actually really excited about that. So now you have the ability to create projects from your templates. You have the ability to create from public templates, a blank project, and then lastly, you have the ability to create a project from AI. So all this does is it tells you our system creates a project for you based on your goals. So for example, let's say you want to be promoted this year from a project manager to a senior project manager. Well, you can type that in as a goal, and Matrix will go and build out some action items that it thinks might be relevant for you to achieve that goal. Your other goals might be to build out a marketing plan or to improve your operational effectiveness for 2024 or something like that. Go ahead and type your goal here. I won't show you because I want you to explore it, try it out, and see how it works for you. And what we try to do there is add context, right? So essentially, we try to understand what it is that might be helpful. Now, it's not intended to be perfect. If you get results, it might be all over the place. And in fact, I've heard feedback from customers like, whoa, the output was totally off. And that's perfectly fine because we know AI is not intended to be perfect. And who knows the path that it goes down. But the idea here is for it to create a starting point for you. And then from there, you can look at the output and say, you know what, these are some good ideas. These are not so great ideas. Delete those tasks, etc. So go ahead and play with that and then, give feedback to us because we're constantly trying to improve that as well. So those are the different ways for you to create a project. So now I'm going to go back to the project list here. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose a different project for, so I'll choose my team priorities project here. So we talked about templates, and let me show you how to actually customize a project and then save it as a template. So as you can see, when I choose this particular project, up here on the top here, I have an option to edit project. If I click on edit project, the right-hand side changes to what's called the project details. So just like the item details, the project details is a place where I can go and change information on the project itself, right? I can change the project name right here. I just click on this and edit the project name. I can star the project. When I star the project, you see how it pops to the top of my list here. So of course, if I start all my projects, then everything will be at the top, and so then there's no differentiation. So that's a basic rule about prioritization, just in case you're not aware, which is if everything's important and urgent, then nothing is, right? If everything is starred, then nothing is starred. So use it at your discretion. Be very cognizant about the tasks that you consider to be high priority. Be cognizant about the project that you star. And so I think that's one of those things where, there are some people with certain personalities where they go and everything is urgent. You got to get it done now, right? And if you do that, it doesn't help anybody because if you're constantly fighting fires, you will never actually be able to plan for the things that are truly critical. So I've met with customers who've given me such good feedback about how they think about things, and I want to share that with you, which is if you use Matrix well, so in the beginning, you'll have some tasks in quadrant 1, right? Because those are the fires that you've been building up. But as you use Matrix more and more, your time should be spent on quadrant 2, the plan quadrant, right? Because you're no longer firefighting and you're actually proactively thinking about what it is that you need to work on. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. Again, don't ever forget that Matrix is around product communication, right? So always show this matrix to your coworkers, to your managers, to your clients and so forth, and ask them, by the way, are we aligned? And so just keep that in mind from a best practice standpoint. But here's the next part. Going back to the project details, Here's the membership. So essentially, these are the members of the project, right? So for example, I might have a project for myself. So in that case, I only myself, but I can invite coworkers into here. And when I do invite coworkers, they get to see the entire project. So keep that in mind from the permission standpoint, which is if you have someone in the project, they can see everything in the project. They can edit everything in the project. Now there's a whole audit trail that keeps a record of all those changes. But from a permission standpoint, that's how it works. And then if you scroll down further, you actually have the different quadrant names. Every single quadrant here can be customized and changed. So for example, right now it's due now, right? I can actually change this and call it fires or something like that. So you can see how I can actually change and customize the quadrant names. The reason you do that is within your own organization, you might start coming up with different ways to use Matrix. So for example, you may not want to use the delegate quadrant as delegate. Instead, some people use it as resources, so documents or files or forms or something like that. And so they'll change every project, they'll customize the project to their own liking. And then afterwards, you can save that again as a template. And do you see how I can change the quadrant name? I can click on this and change the quadrant colors. And then afterwards, if I want to save as a template, I simply go to the top right here and then save project as template. Now, let's just say if I have a template and I want to change that template, how do I do that? Well, all you have to do is launch a new project from a template, then edit that template, and then go back and save that project as template again, and it'll overwrite the previous template. So from a template standpoint, there's only one template per project name. So, for example, you might call it template 1, template 2, employee onboarding, etc. So then once you have that, then you save that as a template and it'll replace the previous one. So if you want different templates, then make sure that you have the different project names when you save it as a template. So when you look at the top right here, there's actually a bunch of other things that I won't go into the details, but I'll just quickly highlight a couple things that's actually really interesting. So again, every project in Matrix and every task in Matrix has a link. So you can actually copy links to project and you can paste them in other matrices, so allowing you to cross-link projects together. So you can think of this as a way to create a project of projects, right? And then you also have the ability to embed this project. So you can actually embed a Matrix into your SharePoint or into your website. Every project has a secret email address. So what that means is it allows you to actually create rules where you can actually forward emails from a certain customer or a certain client into the appropriate project for them. So for example, I have all my Microsoft email sent into one of my Matrix projects. So if the sender is from Microsoft, it does that for me automatically. And I just create a rule in Gmail or Outlook for that. And then from down here, you can see that we have a bunch of other options, including the ability to export and import the projects as CSV. So I've shown you the projects. I've shown you how to edit projects. I've shown you how to create templates. I've shown you how to customize and move things around in the matrix. Let's shift gear and talk about emails. In fact, emails is one of the reasons why customers come to Matrix. A lot of people struggle with that, with email prioritization. I get several hundred emails a day. So sometimes it's extremely difficult to stay on top of it. Now, I flag a lot of them, even when it's not effective. But what happens is if you flag 5 emails, that's fine. If you flag 50 emails or 100 emails, it's not so fine. So you need a better way to actually prioritize those emails, especially the ones I need to respond to much later. Again, the emails that I will respond to in a day or two, that's pretty straightforward. I can actually sort of remember that and I can look at it very easily. But when I have an email that needs to be done, needs to be responded to, or need to be delegated, that's when Matrix really kicks in and becomes really valuable. So here I have Outlook open. When you have Outlook, you can actually go and install Matrix for Outlook. So open the App Store here, click on Add Apps and search for Matrix and you can install it. Of course, I already have it installed. And then when I go here, I click on Matrix and then I choose the prioritize an email. So I have an email, I choose again Matrix and I'm going to choose prioritize email. And so as you can see, this right panel opens inside Outlook and it gives me an action to capture email. So what that means is it takes this email and convert it into a task in Matrix. And that task will have the item name here. This item name I can customize as needed. They just pull it from the subject of the email to start. I can choose what project it goes in. So for example, let's just say, again, I get an email from a particular client. maybe that goes in a certain project, right? And then I can choose what quadrant it goes in directly from here too. So I can choose that, and then I can assign to somebody. Again, this is a very, very useful functionality in Matrix. Let me give you an example. Let's say you get an email from a client and you need to assign it to a team member. Well, if you don't use Matrix, there's a couple things you can do. You can forward it to your coworker. That's easy enough. Say, hey, by the way, can you take a look at this? And I do that sometimes. The only problem with that forwarding to the coworker is now you don't know if they see it or not. And then second of all, they need to track that as a task too. Again, if they have to respond to the customer, how do you ensure that they actually have it in a place where they're reminded and where that task is prioritized within the bigger picture? Because it's not like everyone's just sitting there waiting for an email and then respond to it and get it done, right? They have all these other things they're doing as well. So the whole idea around prioritizing a task is actually ensuring that while this email is important and there's a task associated with it, there's a due date associated with it, that you're thinking about all these other things that you're also working on, and that you actually get it done at the appropriate time. Now, I know I'm preaching a little bit there, but that is the reason why Priority Matrix exists. It's about prioritization. So if you're here today and you're listening, it's likely because you're looking for a way to become more effective at prioritizing, right? And so that is why this is so important. So it's not just about tracking the tasks. It's not about just putting it on a list. It's about making sure that everyone knows that this is important, this is urgent, and when it's due and who's responsible. So again, from this view, I can assign to myself, or I can click on this and assign to another person directly from here. I can choose the due dates. I love due dates, if that's not obvious already, because it gives me another dimension, a dimension of time. And so then within the bigger picture, I can get reminded that I need to answer it. And so if I click capture email, it creates a task. Very, very straightforward. It's using how I do that. And now the right panel opens up, and this is the item details again, just like what you saw in the previous application. And then from here, I can set reminders and everything else. And you see how I assign this task to a coworker, and my avatar is next to it as a follower. What's really neat is that if my coworker marks the task as done or updates it or chat about it, I'll get a notification for it. And so that ensures that I'm actually on top of this as well. So if, again, it's a very important client email, I know that it's getting done. I know that when it's done, I know that it's done, and so forth. So that's really useful. And then in the resource section here, that email was uploaded as an EML file, so my coworker can actually open the EML file on his or her computer or whatever it is and respond to that email as needed. So that tracks it all in one central place. What's really unique about Matrix 2 is the ability to attach an email to an existing task. And so this doesn't exist in any of the other add-ins aside from Matrix, but let me give you an example. So now go ahead and close this here. Let's say I get an email. It's also from a client, but I have already a task open for that, right? Maybe it's a follow-up. So if I click on here again and I choose Matrix, and instead of choosing prioritize email, I choose open Matrix. So again, the right-hand side open, but the difference is the view. So instead of actually letting me just create a task from it, it shows me all the tasks from Matrix. I can search for specific tasks, right? Maybe based on the item name or whatever, but I can actually attach. You see how I can hover over every item, and there's an option that pops up that says attach, and I can actually attach an email to an existing task. This is so helpful if you have follow-up emails and you want to ensure that everyone's on the same page, especially if there's progress that's already being made. Again, if you're working on something and then customers asking for updates or there's other changes and you still want to have it tracked in one central place. So that's how email prioritization works inside Matrix. Everything that I do here is synced back into my Matrix. Now let's jump back to Microsoft Teams. By the way, I was showing you the application inside Microsoft Teams, but here, this is the web app. So if you go to affluence.com/PM, you get to access the web app. You don't need Microsoft Teams. You don't need Outlook in order to use Matrix. But if you do, then definitely install applications for those apps. Let me show you quickly inside Teams what makes Matrix unique there. So as you can see, if you use Teams, you can go to the App Store, find Matrix, and then after you install it, right-click on it and choose Pin. So now that it's pinned, it's always here for you, and then you can actually just jump to Matrix very, very easily. So I highly recommend that. I love using Matrix inside Teams because then I don't have to switch to another application. But If you do that, you'll see it here. And then from Protomatrix, there's this little icon here called the home view. And this is, by the way, where you should start your day in Protomatrix. The home view shows you alerts, and the alerts is essentially notifications on items that required your attention. It could be items that are assigned to you. It could be items that you have that have due dates or reminders. And it'll pop up here, right? So the alerts right now, I have one alert. If I look at it, then I can see, okay, this task, there was a reminder for this task, and so I can look at it and either I can mark it as done or cleared or something like that. If I have a lot of notifications, I can go here and actually clear all notifications. But when we talk about tasks and we talk about notifications earlier, I'm sorry, we talked about reminders earlier, ensuring that the most important tasks are always worked on. It keeps, if you don't mark an important task as done, it'll keep popping back up here for you. And that's the goal of Matrix, which is ensuring that those critical tasks do not fall through the crack. So now let me show you some unique capabilities inside Teams that makes Matrix very powerful. So for example, when I go to a coworker in Teams, I can actually choose what's called the one-on-one view. Earlier, I talked about people-centric collaboration, right? I've shown you the project, I've shown you the quadrant and how it has the tasks associated with it. Now, guess what? When I go to the one-on-one view, I can actually select an individual, like my direct reports or my coworkers or whatever, and I can see every task I have with that person across my entire Matrix, across all the projects in one central place. So think about it for a second. Imagine if you walk into a meeting with your direct report or your colleague or your manager, and then you can actually just pull up this view and you can see everything that you guys have in common. That's the power of this one-on-one view. It actually brings it all into one central place, and then you can be so effective at discussing the tasks that you need to work on, right? You can go and identify all the tasks that are overdue, all the tasks that's recently been worked on, and you can reprioritize directly from here. And you just got to click on the task and the item details pops up. The other thing you can do is actually, as you're having your meeting, you can actually add share task directly from this view. So you can see how I click on add share task, I can type the task name, I can type the due dates, and then it'll create the task for me, and it will automatically add me as a follower too. So then I've just saved a bunch of time having to go to Matrix, find a project, create a task, assign to the person, set a due date, right? I've eliminated all of that. Instead, I can do it from one central view with me automatically getting added and then the task automatically assigned to my coworker. So really use this capability if you use Microsoft Teams or if you do a lot of one-on-ones. And what's neat is that you can add this one-on-one for every single one of your coworker that you work with, right? So if you have 5 direct reports, you can add the one-on-one for each of your 5 direct reports. And as you go through each, it's so easy to see the progress that they make. One of the things I want to mention here is that Matrix makes your meeting so much more effective too, because instead of waiting for a meeting to understand the status of all these tasks that you work on, you can actually, again, go to the one-on-one at any point in time. Whenever it's convenient for you, you can go here and see the status of task. And then vice versa too, your coworkers don't have to go and wait until you have a meeting to figure out, what are the tasks that they need to work on. If there's new tasks or whatever, you again can create all that assignments directly from here. And so to add this one-on-one, all you do is click on this plus icon here, choose Matrix, and then choose the one-on-one view, and that's pretty much it for how to add a one-on-one. And so the other thing you can do that's unique inside Teams too is actually we integrate with all the conversation stuff that you have inside Teams too. So if you have a Teams conversation with somebody, you can just hover over the ellipsis and you can create a task directly from any conversation you have with them. And then not only that, you can actually open up Matrix from the bottom here and send what's called adaptive cards to your coworkers, allowing them to see the task in Matrix. They can view the item, they can mark the item as done directly from inside Teams. All of this is intended to save you time and effort so that you don't have to worry about switching applications and so forth. You can use Matrix whenever it's convenient for you. So we have multiple other integrations I won't go into the details of. For example, you can actually add tabs in your channel chat. You can add tabs in your Teams meeting. We also have other integrations that's called connectors. So if you use other applications that you want to pull into Matrix, Jira, Outlook, To-Do, Planner, Azure DevOps, etc., you can actually sync those with Matrix and pull them as tasks into the Matrix system. And then we also have integrations with Chrome and Edge So for example, you see here, in my edge, I actually have the Party Matrix extension added. And from here, I can actually create a task from any website. What's really neat about that is if I'm using SharePoint or if I'm using a web application and I need to assign something to somebody, I can actually do that directly from the browser. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump back to the presentation and let's talk about what's next for you. So hopefully this gave you a good overview of some of the basic Party Matrix capabilities. And as I mentioned, the 20-80 rule, right? The Pareto rule, use 20% of the functionality in Party Matrix that gives you 80% of the value. Again, making sure that you put the task in the appropriate quadrants, assign it to the appropriate people, setting due dates and setting reminders. If you just did that, if those were the only capabilities you use inside Party Matrix, I think you'll get a ton of value. But if you do use Teams and Outlook, then make sure that you install Party Matrix for Teams and Outlook. It'll help you track the task better. My recommendation is for you to create at least 3 projects to start. And so you have a personal priority project. These are the tasks that you have. And then your share team project. These are the priorities that you have with your coworkers, your managers, or whatever. The idea is that if you could go into a conference room and you can project your Party Matrix onto the big screen and you guys can just talk about priorities, just think about how much more effective that meeting will be, right? Because instead of actually just going through every single action items in that list of 20 of yours, instead you look at the matrix and say, okay, you know what? I'm looking at the 5 things in quadrant 1 and the 5 things in quadrant 2. Are we aligned on those things? If we are, then let's proceed, right? That's it. And so you're able to cut so much time and effort and get rid of all the things that's not necessary. Don't waste your time talking about tasks that are not important and not urgent. Focus on the things that really matter. And then another project that I also like to create is a key initiative. So I do this all the time. I create a project for different quarters or different initiatives. And the reason, even if it's some duplicate work, it just helps track all the things that's going on at any point in time. Just take it out of my brain and put it onto something that's tangible, right? Party Matrix is very, very visual, very easy to see, and I can share that with people. Invite the appropriate team members and pitch them on why it's important to focus on high impact tasks. Again, use Party Matrix, share, show each other what your priorities are. Make sure that you always create due dates, and then finally, ruthlessly prioritize. If you don't prioritize your time and tasks, somebody else will. So some advice. One, if you're new to Party Matrix and you're worried about getting overwhelmed, use Party Matrix to track only high impact tasks, right? That means the tasks that are actually really important, just to make sure that you're going on the right track, right? Because if you, instead of thinking about the fine strokes, think about the broad strokes. So as long as you go in the right direction, maybe that's good enough. And so use Party Matrix to track that. So then you don't get overwhelmed. Think of Party Matrix always as a communication tool. It's not a project management tool. It's not a task management tool. It's a communication tool. And so you're communicating to others. You're communicating to yourself. What is it you need to work on? And then I always like looking at Party Matrix as a place to start with you as an individual. Again, as I mentioned, that's the roots of Party Matrix from a long time ago. We started out as a place for individuals to track their goals and their tasks, and we want to make sure that that's always the case. So what success with Party Matrix should look like? One, you have a central place to track all your priorities. Everyone on the team understands and are aligned on key tasks. Repetitive procedures are templatized, as I showed you earlier. And then if you have important emails, prioritize them. And then triage them to appropriate team members, and you never have to forget them. That concludes my presentation. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the questions now and see if there's any that I can answer for you. And please feel free to attach more or send more questions as well if there's anything else you want me to address. I'm going to start from the top. So the question is, one, this person works in different organizations, and so there's no line of responsibility. And so how do you delegate tasks in that sense? Now, when I talk about delegate, it doesn't necessarily mean that you ask someone to do it and that they have to get it done. It's just the idea that there's a clear, defined ownership. Now, one thing is, if you work with different organizations, Party Matrix actually has something called guest access. So the way guest access works is that you can actually have what's called a consultant license, for lack of better words. With the consultant license, you can actually have users who are from different organizations, and so they can actually still work together with you inside a Protomatrix. But then you might have one project with one organization, another project with another organization, and you can actually work across organization in that case. The other thing is, could you work individually with Protomatrix? Absolutely. Protomatrix is intended to work on a personal level, right? So you can use it just to track your priorities. Even if you work for multiple organizations and you're not sharing the tasks with others, it might still be helpful to create a project for each of these organizations that you work with. So then you actually have a defined place to understand what are the priorities that you have for each of those organizations. The question is whether or not you delegate to yourself. As you can see, when I create a task, there's already an owner. That's me, right? So when I create a task, I can always just assume that if I don't have anyone else that I delegate to, delegate a task to, I can actually just create as many tasks as I need. And then it always starts with me. And then I know, okay, this is what I need to work on. These are my due dates and so forth. So in terms of the webinar, so we'll record it and then I'll post it afterwards. I'll send it out to the registrants shortly, and then from there you can review it. And then if you have any questions around the webinar itself, please feel free to reach out to us. How can you maximize PM while you're still the solo personnel in your company? That's a really good question. As you can see, I didn't actually have to go and invite anyone to any of my projects, right? So if you are one person and you're one person company, you still have a lot of different projects that you work on at any point in time. You might still have a marketing project. You might still have customer management project and so forth. But here's the thing that's really neat, which is if you start by yourself and you create all these different projects, and then later you bring on a coworker or you hire somebody, and you add them to the appropriate project, right? Say you bring on an engineer, you add the engineer to the engineering the product project, or you bring on a customer success person and you add them to a project. Guess what? They can take a look at your project. They can see the full history of all the changes that you've made, all the priorities that you have, and they can get started so quickly. They don't have to have a meeting with you to get to the same page because you've created these tasks in Protomatrix. It's now in one central place. And it's so easy for anyone else to be caught up too. So that's what I probably didn't emphasize enough, which is, again, Protomatrix allow everyone else to see what's in your brain. So even if you're working by yourself now, but in the future, you might have others, they can see the priorities, and that's the goal. And you don't want to be constantly involved to have to answer, hey, this is what we need to work on, or this is why we made this decision. Protomatrix has that record for you. So Protomatrix works just as well for an individual, even if you have all these other projects at any point in time. The other neat thing, the reverse of that works well too, by the way, which is if you have a project and you have coworkers, and then later the coworkers leave, but because they've updated in Protomatrix and they created all the priorities and so forth, even when they leave the organization, you still know what the priorities are. How powerful is that, right? Imagine if you have a key employee and the key employee leaves, and if they take away all your priorities and so forth, all their priorities, and they never shared it with you, you'd be completely blind. You have no idea what you need to work on for any customer or any clients, etc. Right? But by using Protomatrix, all that information is one place, and it actually create really good organizational knowledge. So let's see here. Chat directly from Teams. So actually, regarding the chat with Teams and Outlook, what happens is the chat that I showed you on a per item basis is inside Protomatrix itself. So that chat can still be accessed in Protomatrix inside Teams, but that chat is intended to be on that item. So when you talk to someone directly inside Teams, that's not tracked in Protomatrix. But you saw how I can actually convert any of those chat into a task, but those are completely different contexts. So the problem with chatting inside Teams and talking about 10 different things is that later on, you can't go back and tie it back to the context, the original context. So keep that in mind when you talk about chatting, when you chat with somebody about different things. So always, I recommend that you chat. If you're talking about a specific task, talk about it in Protomatrix chat itself. So you can actually, in terms of assigning Protomatrix to your channel, yes, you can actually attach projects to your channels. And then from there, you can have that as a place to track all the tasks for all the people involved. In terms of modifying template, as you can see, you can modify the quadrants, the colors, you can modify all the existing tasks, save it as a template, and then later on launch it as a template again, do all your changes that you need to do, and then resave as a template. So you can do that. So what's different about Protomatrix HIPAA? So our HIPAA compliant version is completely on a different server, and there are multiple changes there that is intended to protect PII data in terms of the reports that we send and then the emails that we send, as well as the data governing process. And so if you are in the healthcare life sciences, then you can search, or you can look at our HIPAA solution for managing that. So how are they shown? So when you look at a task inside an email, I'm sorry, when you have an email that's inside a task, it's attached as an email file. So then when your coworker looks at it, they can just click on the email file and it actually opens the email in your Outlook application. So it doesn't open inside Protomatrix. Protomatrix is not intended to be an email application. So in some cases, some customers actually have to download the email in order to open it, but that's just based on the policies on their computers and the security on their computer. But all we're doing is we're taking the original email, attaching it as an email file. So the really good question around how do you ruthlessly prioritize? And that's so interesting because you're saying that, people don't have a sense of what their priorities should be. And that's the point, which is a lot of people, when they hear something like that, it's like, we have no idea what the priority should be. Let's just ignore everything, right? That's not what you want to do either. And so the idea of Matrix is at least you have one central place you can say, okay, these are our high level priorities. Do you agree or disagree? And then not only that, one of the best practices I like to suggest is no more than 25% of the task in quadrant 1, no more than 25% of the task in quadrant 2, at most, right? Everything else you can sort of put it down on the other quadrants. But if no one can prioritize, if they're not interested in prioritizing, and then your only options are what? To not do anything or to try. And so you can think of a Protomatrix at least as a starting point. And so then when you have a meeting, your first meeting might be really difficult because you're trying to create alignment and say, by the way, if we only have limited time and effort, these are things we should focus on. Otherwise, we got to drop them. And so if your manager is not doing that, well, that's one clear thing about Protomatrix, which is it tells everyone else, it's like, I only have limited resources. I only have limited bandwidth. You're assigning me 60 hours worth of work in a 40-hour work week. I can only get this much done. What's going to drop? Either you decide what to drop or I'll drop something random. So keep that in mind and use that as a starting point to talk. So don't forget, it's all about it's all about communication, right? So Matrix won't solve your organizational problems, unfortunately. I mean, if your organizations have a hard time deciding where to put efforts and resources, there's nothing we can do about that. But we're just trying to make it easier. We're just a tool that actually adds structure to things that you already do. Is there a way to print the task in the matrix? Yes, you can print that. We actually, in terms of printing the notes itself, I believe that either already exists or is coming, because I know that was a customer request at some point, and I believe that you have that option to print the notes from the task itself. There is no super matrix to view all project. That's correct. So the reason is, as you can see, each matrix may have different terminology and so forth. And so it doesn't actually make sense to aggregate that together. But in Protomatrix, there's something called the search view. So if you go to your Protomatrix here and you go to the search view, inside the search view, this is what we call the master view. Essentially, it's an aggregate of every action item that you have across all your projects. And then when you combine it with the filter, you can actually achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. So from here, you can go and say, show me only quadrant 1 or show me only quadrant 2, assigned to a certain user. You can include tags and so forth directly from here. So afterwards, you can actually save some of these filters too. So let's say you create a filter that says task assigned to yourself, right? Or task assigned to my team or something like that. Then afterwards, you can save this as a template, and then afterwards, you can access all this data really quickly. But there's no one single matrix that aggregates all of this. This filtering is actually even more capable than that. All right. Are there any other questions? There's a lot of questions, and Hopefully I answered them. If not, feel free to reach out to me, hi@affluence.com or support@affluence.com. Thank you very much for the question. Thank you for your attention today. Hopefully this was helpful. Thank you. Bye-bye.